Good morning, baseball fans, and welcome back to Dan's Vintage Baseball PC. Do not be fooled by this very fancy name I've come up with for the channel because it's just me and some baseball cards. And today, it's more about one card and a little bit of sleuthing that I did on that one card. If you remember, last week's episode with Ian about DiMaggio, we both had the 1939 to 46 Exhibits card, which I have in a 1.5. It's got some little bit of corner and edge wear, consistent with that grade. But what it does have on the back, which I didn't talk about yesterday, is some writing. So this writing made me curious about who and what it was about. So let me just bring up the cards here. And there's DiMaggio, as you can see in the classic pose. It's a terrific card, and it's very affordable. I purchased this card from the Collector Connection auction, which is located in Pennsylvania. Scott Russell is the owner and operator, and he is a great guy, does a lot of shows, and travels around the country getting collections. Interesting fellow to talk to at card shows. But Collector Connection is a really, really well organized website, and their auctions are terrific. But this came in, I believe I purchased this for less than $100 raw, sent it into SGC, and it got the 1.5, which obviously, because there's writing on it, would be the appropriate grade. But it's in my display because it presents really well, and you don't see the writing when it's in display. But what's cool about it is the back. And I did a little close-up here. Frederick Cox in Mrs. Hanlon's. Now, I once thought that was Harlow, but I looked a little closer, and it says Hanlon. So, obviously, I thought to myself, who is Frederick Cox? And is Miss Hanlon, I'm assuming it's his teacher. So I did quite a bit of sleuthing when I bought this card a couple of years ago, and decided after doing the video last week, with Ian, that I would do this. I would finally go ahead and do the sleuthing video on Frederick Cox. So, legacy. What's there's an ancestry.com that I'm a member of, and just general Google sleuthing. I was able to come up with two people named Frederick Cox who were born in the mid-30s, which is when I think the person would be born if they were collecting this DiMaggio card from 39 to 46, and they were in baseball collecting age. And this does look like a signature by somebody who is probably 10 to 12 years old. So I looked for mid-30s, and I think I did 32 to 38. Two people on the northeast of the United States were named Frederick Cox. One lived in Maine, and one lived in New Jersey. So here's our Frederick Cox, born about 1935. We'll get a better number on that. In New Jersey, Boonton, New Jersey was where he's born. Montville is where he grew up. And pay attention to the names. Wendell Cox and Josephine Cox are his parents, his sister Geraldine. And pay attention to the name on the bottom there, Frank Scozzafava. Scozzafava is a last name that I had never heard in my entire life until I started doing the research on this. So Frank Scozzafava is going to come up much later. But so this, I'm pretty confident that this is the Frederick Cox that's on the back of that DiMaggio card. Boonton and Montville are about 20 miles from Yankee Stadium. And so Frederick Cox, if he was born in 1935, now he would be in his late 80s. But I did track down this sad little thing that Frederick Cox passed away in 2017 at the ripe age of 82, which is a life well led. And you can see from the description in his obituary, born in Montville, raised in Boonton, predeceased by his parents, who were this Wendell and Josephine Scozzafava, which would be her father-in-law's name, which was correct on the census, and his sister Geraldine. So this is definitely the same Frederick Cox from the 1940 census. Interesting part of his life there. He was a veteran of the United States Army, which would lead me to believe, based upon the timing, that he was in the Korean War. Uh, he would have been 20 years old in 1955. And so if he was 18 or so, he would be in the Korean War. Fred and his wife owned Italian restaurants in Neptune, New Jersey, and Venice, Florida. And he served as a food services manager for Bon Secours. Now, I did searches on all of this stuff. And Frederick Cox, as a person born in 1935, doesn't have much of an internet presence. Um, but I pretty much feel like this is the Frederick Cox that signed the back of that card. Now, Scosa Faza was such an interesting and unique last name that I decided to do some searches of his name. And I did a search of Scosa Faza and DiMaggio. And I came up with this gentleman, Martin Davis, who also appears to have had an extraordinarily full life, who passed away in 2022. And I've little red circle there says childhood idol was Joe DiMaggio of the New York Yankees. So Martin Davis, who himself also served in the Korean War, was born in 1932, lived in the Bronx and some other parts of New York before moving to Florida. But what's really interesting is down there where they talk about his survivors. His brother-in-law was named Frank Scosa Faza. So he's not the same Scosa Faza from the 1940 census, because that gentleman was 54 years old, and in 2022 would have been well over 100. So my guess is that Frank Scosa Faza could be the son or grandson of the gentleman from the census. So interesting little tidbit here. Boyhood idol Joe DiMaggio with a family connection to the same name as our Frederick Cox. So no way for me to know the connection there, or even if there is one. It seems awfully coincidental for that to be the case. But anyway, so I feel like Frank is the interesting connection here. I feel like we have the right Frederick Cox, and so I decided to look into Miss Hanlon, and the only Miss Hanlon I could come up with as a teacher in New Jersey. There's nothing from the 40s or 50s, but there is a Miss Hanlon, that West O Ranger, that is a yearbook of the West Orange, New Jersey high school, where you could see Miss Hanlon sitting at the desk there, a teacher who, based on her apparent age there, could most certainly have been a grammar school teacher in the 1940s, because by 1968 she was somewhat of an older woman. And at this point, I don't know if this is the same Miss Hanlon. It could be, it could not be. It's probably about 50-50. But the reality is that I'm pretty sure I have the right Fred Cox. So I did a little mapping. And as you can see in the upper left, there's Boonton and Montville, I'm sorry. There's West Orange. They're about 5 miles apart. So it's perfectly legitimate surmise that Miss Hanlon from the 60s in West Orange could be the same Miss Hanlon from Montville in the 1950s or 40s. And then on the far right, you can see Yankee Stadium. So I think West Orange to Yankee Stadium is about 12 miles. And and Montville, Boonton to Yankee Stadium is probably about 20 miles. So certainly Yankee fans are in that area in droves. And so our Frederick Cox could most certainly have been a Yankee fan. So Frederick Cox wrote on his baseball cards when he was a little kid, and so did somebody else, and that would be me. I have saved a handful of my cards from the 1970 set, which it was the first set I collected, and apparently I wanted to make sure that my ownership of those cards was known, so I wrote my name on the top of each of these cards. I was in the summer of 1970. I was not quite 7 years old, so kind of happy with the penmanship there for a 6-year-old. But anyway, so kids wrote on their cards, and I am one of those. I plead guilty. So Frederick Cox is a person who would be lost to history other than family members, if not for that little piece of writing on the back of that Joe DiMaggio card. So this Joe DiMaggio card is great for a number of reasons. It's the classic DiMaggio pose. So we love the baseball players in their classic poses. It's a kind of a piece of art, which we like baseball cards because they're kind of art, but it also tells a story about people who collected baseball cards and put their name on the back of the card and lived lives. And that's an important thing I think about when I think about collecting baseball cards. It's not just the card that I own for a brief period of time. It's a card that somebody has owned, multiple people have owned, and those people have stories. They have life stories. And it's interesting to me that every single one of those cards behind me has a life story behind it that we can't really ever know unless we know the original collector and we know things about them, unless they wrote their name on the card, which is cool. So I like this episode not as because it's a big collection thing, but because it kind of takes into account one of the reasons why we collect these baseball cards and why it is sociologically important to do so. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Next week we're going to have Ian back again to talk about his Christy Mathewson collection. So I'm excited about that. And we will see you back here next week. Thanks.